Welcome to My View from the Piano Bench. We do this on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. here in my Joe Holt's Notes YouTube channel, in addition to Piano for My Friends on Thursdays. And you likely know the drill. I have a topic that I just allow myself to speak extemporaneously on. And sometimes that topic is a song title, which could take me talking about the song itself or about experiences that song brings to mind, or things that hopefully are relevant or helpful or useful or interesting, or at least not entirely stupid for me to share. And that's where I'm going today. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me via the links you will find on the support page of my website, and you'll see a link to that in the video description. And of course, once you're on one page of my website, you have access to all of it. So poke around, add yourself to my mailing list if you're not currently on that, particularly if you don't follow me on Facebook. I was going to say social media, but I have not brought myself yet to do Instagram. But I do send out a monthly newsletter, and it's kind of comprehensive in what's going on. And it's not simply about gigs in my immediate area. So wherever you are, you might find it interesting. And there we go. Thank you for your consideration to the support page if you watch regularly and you have not considered it. That in effect sponsors these videos. But I know not everyone's in that position. We're all in the position we're in. And the position I'm in is grateful and happy to be here and happy to go on. So the topic is the song title. You'll probably recognize it. If you follow me, you're aware of, songs that George Gershwin wrote, right? Someone to Watch Over Me. And it's an iconic Gershwin tune. And it occurred to me that I don't believe that I've brought up a Gershwin song. And let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and play just a little bit of it. As you're probably aware, I moved the phone camera much closer. It doesn't have much view of the keyboard. It's really not about me playing, but I'm going to play a little bit and allow that to guide my discussion. A beautiful tune and a great example of the compositional prowess, the genius of Gershwin. And songs like this go back to the 1920s, and you can't say that there wasn't harmonic sophistication in the 1920s. So, talking about jazz, and this is a tangential lunge right away, so we'll see what happens. The thing that defines jazz in the current climate, and really starting with the bebop revolution, and it just intensified and grew from there, and then with the fusion, it just kept going, is the emphasis on, shall we say, harmonic sophistication. Emphasis on those things that are such a singular focus in jazz that it no longer could hold, it no longer could float in the sea of general public acceptance. Put it like that. And contemporary jazz musicians center on that harmonic sophistication. I think about that a lot because I am a kind of a feel and find player, and I really rely on the structure of a song. And the structure of Someone to Watch Over Me is a very defined structure. And it's great as an improviser for me. And I've learned this about myself, but it's really, really nice to now have a very nice review that comes out and says it. I see myself as a song player, or as reviewers said, a song interpreter, as opposed to a jazz player in the sense of we're exploring all these cool things we can do, and I'm not discounting it. I'm saying it's a different direction, and the past, the pre-bebop era, is often looked on as lame, or in some camps in jazz. There is a recognition, though, that a lot of those standards are still substantive tunes, but that recognition kind of gets lost in the, that era's not jazz. And that's a multi-pronged fork in several roads. But if you just look at the structures of some of the tunes that happened in the late 20s and early 30s, it's like stuff is going on, stuff is happening. A tune I often point to, and I may make this a topic at some point, is the U.B. Blake tune, Memories of You. It's and you just think, that era, it's like If You Knew Susie Like I Knew Susie, which I think was also U.B. Blake, right? Or I'm Just Wild About Harry, or that's U.B. Blake. Yeah. But, okay, there was a gig decades ago that I did with a bass player, one who's not really in my circle meaning, stylistic compadre kind of thing. But for some reason he called me for this gig. He had this ongoing duo thing, and he had all kind of players come in, and I decided to come into the gig, and I don't know if this helped me or hurt me. Maybe it hurt me because you never heard from him again. But it's like I knew that I didn't have some of the places to go that he would typically go in terms of the jazz song lexicon vocabulary thing, but he seemed genuinely intrigued in the sophistication of some of the older tunes, and invited me to just throw them to him on the gig, and he played a lot of them for the first time, and one of them or at least some of them for the first time, because I do remember that he was not aware of Memories of You, and he was really taken by it. And I think there was that kind of sense of bias that, this was just that old, trad jazz era where not much was happening. So fold that all in to the understanding that those of us who live in the song interpretation place, or like Dave McKenna said, the older I get, the less I consider myself a jazz player and more of a song player, or vice versa, however he said it. We are seeking, or at least I am, deep, intuitive human expression through these songs, in the same way that another creative person would seek, that in something they would consider more cutting edge. And I guess that's the way to put this. A song like this would not be considered cutting edge, 100 years or so after it was written, but it certainly holds its own. There. That's a good way to say it. It took me a long time. It's kind of a problem I have. I'm reminded of a video I did a couple of months ago in this series called The Most Dangerous Song in Jazz, which was ascribed to the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow by a musician that I was working with. Hang on just one second, I want to check something. Sorry about that. And the idea being with that song, and in essence, he's not wrong. I took issue with the idea of, jazz versus the song, and I don't know what I said, but the part of his statement that really rang true was that song could be taken all these different ways. And he and I, on that particular gig, kept crossing wires, with how to play that song. Now, the comeback to that is where you find out what the original was. And I think in the case of this Gershwin thing, it's a little more standardized. But even in that standardization, I know that if I were to play this song on a gig with, say, a bass player I never worked with who might be coming from a different center of gravity, we would probably have a few misses until we kind of landed someplace. But what's cool about this? How can I say this? Now, this is the first, but I'm going to stop here. And I just realized that's the beginning notes in a sentimental mood, right? Wow. Huh. Wait a second, I transposed it wrong. Now that I have the other tune in my head, I can't play a song I played a million times. That starts in the Sentimental Mood. Boy, I was not anticipating going here. And I'll stop there. So that's moving. I realize I've only ever played in the Sentimental Mood in the key of F, but There it is in the key of B flat. I should be better at things like that, but there it is. All right, so someone to watch over me. And actually, it's that chord. Where I was going with that before I distracted myself, hope you can follow me, and you may have to tell me what I was doing. So what I was going to say was, this movement is a very basic, foundational kind of tension release, dominant or at least secondary dominant to secondary tonic, too many words, movement. But then what tends to happen in this song, and I think what Gershwin did, at least what all the players who play pretty much agree on, so we're going to say Gershwin wrote it, I should look it up, is you do this like tension chord instead. And then what happens is, and this is something you can listen for if you have good speakers and good ears and are attuned to this sort of thing. Is that chromatic bass line. And see, this is one of the things that you can, that harmonic sophistication can and should do, and that's create melodic opportunities. So by having and really if you feel that, it's like tension, release, but not really going, and then tension. So it's all this kind of delicious ebb and flow. And when you're expressing something, you're of course expressing ebb and flow in one of many, many ways, or when I say tension and release, that's kind of what I mean. So that song kind of sets you up. You don't have to search, to find that. It's already there in the structure of the song. You could play a much more, simply structured song, and then you would build some of that in yourself, or it would happen in other ways. So, but isn't this beautiful? So, that is the way that most people would approach the tune. Now remember, how do I keep this straight? Years ago, somebody said, just do descending diminished chords, which is not exactly true. Because one of those is not a diminished chord, but you kind of figure it out when you do it. But you could. So, go back to the idea of a dangerous song in jazz, right? One bass player will land here, one bass player will land here. Depends on which one's on the gig, if it's going to mess with what I do. But I think with this tune, most people who play it often enough do the descending bass line thing. But now I want to go back to what I stumbled on. Woo! As soon as I played the chord at the top that you go to for In a Sentimental Mood, you see how the whole ground shifts underneath, and you can't actually do what I did. Right? So when I get to that first chord, This kind of diminished chord sets up the tension that moves me there, and this moves me there, this moves me, and then the way I do it, which might not be how everybody does it. But now if I go play in a sentimental mood, I mean, you could still do it, but where that really wants to take you is where in a sentimental mood takes you. So all those wonderful possibilities. Yeah, the rhythmic structure is the same. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So you're landing on 1 on this note. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're landing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Now the stock or standard keys for those two tunes are different, and that's one of the things that if you heard the listen to the record of one then the other, they wouldn't seem so similar because in a sentimental mood it's typically played in F. Some of the watch over me is typically played in E flat. So, yeah, so like I say, I kind of stumble on that. Cool. Speaking of keys and potential of stumbling, songs with lyrics, Great American Songbook tunes, songs that you would accompany a singer on a gig, have the, if you want to talk about dangerous things in jazz, have the hazard of the singer probably not singing it in the original key. So I mentioned E flat as a stock key. And that's as long as there's not a singer singing it. But that's probably the original key. That's the key in all like pieces of original music you'll find in fake book arrangements and stuff like that. But when you are accompanying a song, you have to defer to the key of the singer. And so these Great American Songbook era tunes, when they're played currently, are usually these days played behind singers. Now, back in like the 30s, I would venture to say, I don't have evidence of this, but I think nobody would argue with me. You would probably have a greater volume of recordings of instrumental tunes without vocals playing these things, because these were the jazz tunes of the day. Right? These days, jazz tunes are their own kind of category, right? And aren't necessarily lyric driven. They can be, but jazz is an instrumental pursuit. If you have a vocalist, you're singing tunes that have lyrics that are, and often older Great American Songbook tunes, which is a cool thing about the rise of all these young female singers who are singing all these older tunes in jazz and keeping them going. And this is the kind of fork in the road or dichotomy that I've talked about before, where there are two kinds of jazz gigs, really. When you accompany singers and when you just are an instrumental group. And when you're accompanying a singer, you want to, or if you are a singer, you want the best musicians to accompany you, and they are typically the ones who play instrumental jazz and can get around and transpose tunes and all that. But those are the musicians who were like kind of waiting to be able to, go to their gig and just stretch out and, venture way beyond the structures that you're kind of limited to with a singer. And for me, if I were to do that other kind of gig, I'd be like, can I have an accompanying gig? Can I play tunes with a singer now? That would be me. Here's something that if you're not a working musician, you probably don't think about. Keys that guys and gals, men and women, male and female, boy and girl singers, sing in, in biological makeup of things, are generally different. And there are, if a girl was singing this, that's a mezzo-soprano range, right? Let me see. Yeah, not a. I mean, really, you probably want just a true soprano singing that. But think about like the high voice, not necessarily operatic, but that's not what you typically hear. You hear the lower, sultry, alto or even tenor range voice, and most jazz singers, women singers, sing in that lower range, and so there's sort of like this general template that if a song's in a particular key, you're going to move it down about halfway down. Not exactly halfway down, it's a tritone, but like either a fourth or a fifth. The tritone would be in between the augmented fourth or diminished fifth. So, like, for example, what one singer that comes to mind, I'm almost positive, Paula Johns. I'm almost positive. You know what? I'm not sure. No, I think she does sing it in B flat. So now we're going to go down to the fourth. Which, by the way, is not a tenor range. That would be solid alto, not quite mezzo. But then I think there are other female singers, and one in particular. You sing it in G, and so these days we're seldom playing the song in the original key. We're playing it in the singer's key. Now this brings up something interesting. I struggled more with transposing in a sentimental mood than I just did transposing, at least initially. I could get there. But it flowed a little easier with Someone to Watch Over Me. One, because I've done it with this tune. And I played it in different keys. And I've never played in a sentimental mood behind the vocalist. Which means I've never been challenged to not play it in the original stock key. In that key, I don't have to think about it. Now, if I were working with a singer, let's say we move that down, the same interval that we moved down Someone to Watch Over Me for Paula, we would move it down to C. And why am I confused all of a sudden? Yeah. for female singers, and some singers would sing it even lower, are really not the best keys to play instrumentally, because you wind up sort of voicing everything low, and so the chords kind of get muddied up a little bit, and then if you bring the melody up an octave, it sounds like, where'd the flute player come from? We don't need the flute player, the piccolo player. So it's a little more challenging. So let's go back to Someone to Watch Over Me, because that's the song of the hour here. Oh, I didn't talk about the verse yet. I purposely left that out. So don't let me forget. No, I have to tell myself, don't forget. I could write it on this little paper here and then forget to look at it. Remember verse. E-R-S-E, verse. There. I'm going to see that in a few days and wonder what verse I'm talking about. A Bible verse? What? Anyway. Yeah, I was going to play the wrong tune. Now, that's a beautiful, key where everything harmonically lays really nice. And when these songs are written, they were written so everything would lay in a good place. And what I mean by that is that, there are better ranges of any instrument for whatever function it has. For example, a bass. The range of a bass, whether it's an electric bass, an upright bass, a tuba, a bass saxophone, playing those bass notes, is down here, is low notes, right? Okay, that works there. So if you decide to play your bass notes, but you decide to play them where a trumpet would play, you get a whole different takes you a whole different place, because it's not underneath being a foundation to everything. So you hear these low bass notes, they're actually defining everything that happens above them. See, that bass note could do that funky thing as long as it's underneath. But that's where you expected it to go. So the bass is an obvious example, but that kind of principle, sometimes more subtly than that, is applicable in any instrument. There's a certain range that instruments play, including voices. And look at guitar chords happen in a certain range. If I was let me pick another tune. Let me see. That was my attempt, as best I can, to strum. Pianos can't strum chords, right? And so my left hand in that case was imitating a guitar. Ching, ching, ching. Right? And that sounded right there. if I played it down where the bass plays, you're going to say two of those three bass players has to go home. Right? So that's the principle behind it. And without analyzing it any further, just saying the original keys that songs are in allow all those places to lay most easily in those sweet spots. And by the way, the melody can be played by any instrument. It can be played in the bass, but then the bass player takes a different function for that time. And so, like, the bass player can come up like the whack-a-mole, and play the melody, everything kind of adjusts, and then goes back and plays bass. So there's all this stuff that can happen, but just foundationally, there's all these appropriate places, but the melody can show up anywhere. And I think typically in Great American Songbook era tunes, or tunes in general that aren't already positioned or in a key for a particular singer, that it tends to be kind of a soprano range, right? Where if it's a guy singer and the guy's a tenor, it winds up being an octave lower, but it works, like a high baritone or a tenor. But usually, a song like this, a female singer would sing. That's what I was not trying to remember what I was going to say. Now, when we get past the Great American Songbook era of songs, the songs tend to be more written by the performers, like the singer-songwriter era. And so, like in the Gershwin, Irving Berlin era, Cole Porter would be a little different, maybe. Well, if you're right, well, there's exceptions, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. Let's just say, in very general terms, songs from that Great American Songbook era are written so that the original keys lay really well instrumentally. All the things fall into place. Because they're not written for a particular vocalist with a particular range. So there's kind of a standardization. Now, in popular music, particularly starting in the 60s, that goes away. And whatever key the original recording of a song was, is the key that's standardized for that song. And that, because songs are more attributable, to the artist who originally wrote and performed them, in the 60s, 70s, and beyond, than in the 20s and 30s when you had Tin Pan Alley and you had, guys in rooms writing songs, right? So it's a whole different thing. So the original key kind of template of, let's say, Beatles and beyond, breaks down a little bit. Okay, I'm thinking, what's that tune? What key's in it? All over the place, right? And it's actually on the high side, and if you moved it an octave lower, then all the accompaniment would get, and so it's not as clean. But it was written in Elton John's key for Elton John to sing. And Elton John had this, big range, and he could do that. If that song were like written in the Great American Songbook era, it probably wouldn't fly. Because there is kind of a template. But in another way, Elton John songs are a lot like Great American Songbook tunes. Okay, Elton John songs versus Great American Songbook. I'll have to think about that. So, just an interesting point about the difference in like what the center of gravity of a key or a stock key for a tune. Now, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road winds up being in F, which is the same key as in a Sentimental Mood. But more of a range of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Elton John could pull off some things that not every singer could, right? So anyway, let's get back to the subject at hand, because there's one other place I want to go. And that's the idea of the verse. So those Great American Songbook era tunes, it was pretty much standard practice that they all had what we call a verse, something that precedes the main part of the tune. And in large part, in the contemporary application of these songs, the verses are gone. The verses, though, if not melodically, because sometimes they're very different than the chorus of the song, lyrically they set up the song. Now, if I were to, I wasn't thinking of doing this, but if I were to get out the fake book, my original, or one, not original, but Real Book 1, it says 6th edition, not 1, but you just know it's 1 because it doesn't say 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Open any tune. Okay, so here is, how did that get there? Okay, so here's Have You Met Miss Jones? This is a tune from the 1930s, right? And I can guarantee you that there's a verse to this song somewhere. I have no idea what it is. I've never heard it, never played it. It's never played. This is played by jazz players, though. This is a tune that jazz players still know. And here's an example of the stock key is F. Everybody plays Have You Met Miss Jones in F. I don't think I've ever played this behind a singer. So I've never had to contend with playing this in a different key. Or deal with the verse. Verses are largely not remembered. But there are a few verses that have survived. Somewhere with the Rainbow. That tune. That was a long verse, and maybe slightly more obscure than some others. One verse that I do know. I don't know a lot of verses of tunes. Is the verse to White Christmas, and I know the lyrics to that. The sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, L.A. But it's December the 24th, and I am going to be up north. And what does that set up? That sounds nothing like White Christmas. It's a whole separate thing, but it sets up, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, right? Now, I don't remember the words to the verse of Someone to Watch Over Me. Part of it. And when I pick a topic, there's a song title for this. I'm not doing it to just talk about the song, and I'm not doing research about, reading my history books and stuff. Is just, I have a lot of experiences around playing this song. I'm just letting it take me. But there is a verse, and some singers, in fact, if a singer's singing this song, the verse is kind of important. Look up the words. It really sets it up. I think it's like, I'd like to add as an interest to my monogram, shepherd to lost lamb. Or I should know the verse, but. So if you read the words of that, man, it sets up the tune. But melodically, like, you have no idea, if you have never heard the verse before, that you're getting Someone to Watch Over Me next. So the last little thing I'll say real quick is a fun little thing. Max Murray, bass player friend, pointed out that you could take the verse as Someone to Watch Over Me, because it's kind of a long verse, right? And you could convert it into its own jazz tune. You just have to mess with it a little bit. So you put a little swing to it. That's the first A section. Song form A, A, B, A. Second A, same as the first. Now B section, contrasting. But instead of ending, go back to A. Then you can improvise it. It's its own 32-bar tune. A little place of silliness to kind of steer this to a conclusion. So a lot to unpack in a song like that, and to me, just the richness of being able to explore something like that is just my playground, right? And I do really rely on the structure of songs. I mean, I can play freely, but and without structure, but I don't always have enough internal structure, and like memory of what I did to create something quite this structured improvisationally. It tends to, I hate to use the word meander, but yeah, it moves around, and it's its own thing. But there's something about just the structure of the song that really allows me to be free. It's like the being out in the big pasture with a big fence around, where everything inside that fence is safe and that's all you really need, and it's not necessarily safe to go out or you're going to get lost or whatever. That's a bad illustration, but maybe not. And I always say, I always appreciate structure. I really like structure. I enjoy structure, especially when someone else provides it for me. But that's what these songs do. Beautifully so. So there's an example of a great American Songbook era tune, one that guys like me have played millions of times. And last point that I wanted to say, glad I remembered, that it maintains some relevance in contemporary culture. Like, jazz singers will still sing it, it's a meaningful song, and it made its way into a movie, not quite to the extent that, like, It Had to Be You was sung by Harry Connick Jr. when Harry met Sally, and everybody's heard it. But if you've seen the movie Mr. Holland's Opus, which if you haven't, I would recommend it. I don't watch many movies. I can't sit still. But that's a really good movie. It's about a band director. So it's like, my world here. But that song is part of that movie. And that's really all you need, a little insert in the culture, or like ragtime music with Marvin Hamlish, in the Sting, right? So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I may be a few minutes short, but I think I'm close. Am I a clock watcher? Well, I am a clock watcher in that whenever I can, I try to make sure these videos are at least an hour long. And thank you so much for being here. And I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow, maybe, for Piano for My Friends. And hopefully in person, and keep in touch, and thanks so much.